Start recording. Boom. Okay. Let's get into Lyriia. Welcome to the prelude of the Trade Wars series, where we are discussing today Lyriia. That is a place to discuss, right? It's a fun place to discuss. Now, I've just been getting over being sick, so I'm going to sound a bit rough. I will try not to cough as much as I can in the microphone, because I sound like this. Keith Richards laughing. That's what I sound like still. Anyway, so Lyriia, that's the country. Now, I thought it was only fitting because we had just finished with Atrovian. Why don't we jump across the Irian Channel and discuss Lyriia? They have similar beginnings, a totally different story as they get out, and one that's engulfed in a lot of inner turmoil. As when it comes to the identity of the Illyrian people, what it is to be an Anaku, and how to function in the world. That's going to be kind of the main thing that we're going to be seeing. But first, we're going to go through the general history of the Illyrian people in decent detail, a little bit more than we do Atrovian because there's a little bit more known about Lyriia. Let me see, the modern understanding of them, why they... So, Lyrians now sit in the modern world in a precarious place. We'll say that. They are between giants. They have the enemy, the original enemy of Tantorum, which we'll get into why they're the original enemy, to their south. And to the north across the Irian, they have this big brother kind of pressure of the Atrovian Empire. These Anaku that are trying to guide Lyriia into what an Anaku should be. So there's a cultural kind of balance going on in that aspect, but also at the same time, when it comes to the people in Tantorum, there's a grave threat that's growing on the border. Now, Tantorum being the largest kingdom of man, we'll see Lyriia as one of the greatest threats to mankind. More so than they would even look at like Adrana and all that. And that's just the way that is. Now, we're going to give a little bit of background and the events that are going to shape them, and that would lead up to the trade war. So we'll definitely explain some of the trades that happen and some of the events that led to where we're going to sit in the early 1620s. So let us go to the next slide. That is Lyriia, ladies and gentlemen. Now, as you can see down there in the corner is a little scale to show you just how large it is. It's roughly... How do you even say that? It's roughly 560,000? No, I don't know. 560/000 square miles. Whatever the fuck that is, you can say it. Now, there is a divide between what is called the mountain realms and the fertile realms, which we will definitely get into a little bit more. As you can see, the areas out in white. So I have a little pointer again. I forgot all about. Let's use the laser pointer. As you can kind of see, these little areas in white here, these are just the different realms. You know, it acts the same as it would in Dubois or Atrovia for that matter, or Tantorum. Like, you know, there's realms, there's counties, there's countries, there's states. Whatever way that they would divide their land, this is just how they chose to do it, and that would be between the mountain realms and the fertile realms. Now, this giant area is considered the fertile realm, but Napasu and Daradin and Resh realms and Halaf and a little bit of Danu here, these are going to be places that play a significant role in the culture and growth of Lyriia. Because we have, in the fertile realms, in the realms that people live that are not mountainous, so not in the Livrail, or not in the Sinker, or Aho, or or the Aquisian, oh, itchy. None of those realms. But the ones outside of it are the people called 𝚿𝚛𝚎. And the 𝚿𝚛𝚎 are the lesser class people. They are looked at as, I wouldn't quite say untouchables or undeserving people, but they're the lower class, or the peasant class, or the ones that do not dwell under the mountains. Now, there will be a significant reasoning for that, and again, we'll get into it. But just to kind of show you where Lyriia sits on the map, so just so you're not confused. Fucker. The Lyrians. Now, the Lyrians are a sophisticated race of Anaku that dwell under the mountains. Yet still, we can see their relevance in all of Vas as to the trade that keeps their nation afloat. There would be wars and struggles with their neighbors to the south in Tantorum, but these conflicts would be expected between old enemies that date back to the counting of time. This is just a quick overview. In time, Lyriia would join the Council of Nations, a council of Anaku elders and statesmen that look to progress the Anaku peoples and speak of their relevance in the growing Aeon world. Kind of a coup, if you will. A uniting of Anaku council was formed by the Atrovians around the mid to early 1600s, and you'll see that near the end of the slides here where we're going to kind of get into that. But the Council of Nations would be the circle of Anaku that we'll definitely see. Though in secret, the Lyrians would be influenced by another group, one that has its ties to radical nationalists. And again, that's preluding to what would be the Atrovians. Cave dwellers. Now, the Lyrian people are known as cave dwellers. They are people, they're like, in modern fantasy, they're like dwarves. They live within the mountains for the most part. Now, these are vast interconnected mountains that have these sprawling highways, kind of like great roads, if you like think of Dragon Age, or any kind of dwarven thing. You imagine there's these ways where they live under the mountains, but they found ways to carve these natural roads from one city to another. I'll kind of show that mapped out a little bit in a few slides. Now, these giant roadways were called 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞. And again, they're just these, it's not really, like it says there, they can be these dark caverns or even tight claustrophobic passages for miles. They could be these hewn, miles wide major highways, or they could kind of at times go into these skinny little hallways. It just kind of depends on the rock from which they're carved. Now, it was believed that the Lyrians were taught this stuff by that word there. I think it's called Nuyeos. Nuyeyoi. I don't know how to say that. We're just going to say the bearded pygmy. But it was believed that they were taught this kind of, I wouldn't say understanding, because I always want to say understanding, this craft of carving through the mountains. Not proven, but definitely a part of their culture. These Lyrians are subterranean people, being that long ago that they inhabited the dark places of the forest in Trinity, just like the Atrovians. So the Lyrians and the Atrovians, which were the 𝚙𝚙𝚎 tribes, both inhabited the Trinity Forest. They both lived in the forest with all the other Anaku people under the banner of 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎, King 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎, the High Anaku King. Now, before we get to the next slide, that background picture there, that's going to, you can kind of just see, that is, it's like I wouldn't call it a mountain, it's just a giant landmass, because it's not, to me, a mountain's like a mountain. That's a smaller mountain, if you want to call it, but you can see there at the bottom, this entryways, and this area here, this is like a temple. Just a picture of a temple, just its entrance, as you can see. That people inhabit. Anyway, next slide. We're going to get into a little bit of the bearded pygmy and the Lyrians. Now, there's no confirmation that these two ever crossed paths, but legend says these people that became the Lyrians once crossed paths with the forgotten race of Aeon, and it was they who taught the Anaku of mining and harvesting from the very rock of Yuandra. This is folklore that had been passed on for centuries among the circles of elders. One story remains the story of 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, the last king of the bearded pygmy, and his aiding of the lowly prince. I don't remember his name. To safety, when it's a little confusing here because there's not a lot of information. But the stories kind of say that this 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, which was a bearded pygmy king, aided what would become the Lyrian peoples during the whole thing that happened with Tan and the man exiting the forest and thus beginning the whole story of mankind. Something happened with mankind and the Lyrians that caused them to be banished. Now, it's not really clear what it was that happened. It seems to have been forgotten by time, whether on accident, whether on purpose. This would be the last remaining story of the bearded pygmy, and one that would live in honor. And that's the story of 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍. And the story basically just goes like he came upon this lowly prince, one of the last, I guess you could call him, elder of the Lyrian peoples, and helped gather them to exit the forest and be free from the reign of King 𝚆𝚅. Though they were essentially banished, the Lyrians would choose to say, no, we exited the forest to find a new home away from the tyranny of King 𝚆𝚅. But that's just like, hearsay. Speaking of that, here's the banishment of the Lyrians. Now, the general notes that we know: King 𝚆𝚅 banished the 𝚆𝚅, Lyrians, and 𝚃𝚛𝚊 tribes from the forest, for it was they who allowed the growth of man throughout the forest in some way, shape, or form. Are there a connection to the bearded pygmy, the story of the king and helping the prince? Is there a connection there? I don't know. Some would say it was they who allowed the new species to dwell in the hidden places of the woods. The Lyrians were led to safety from an old friend in 𝚿𝚙𝚎, the faithful 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚎. Now, 𝚿𝚙𝚎, the 𝚃𝚃𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚎, the name that you probably heard a few times, that guy, that person, that being, was sent to the realm of life, we can call it, to aid on the side of the Titans. Now, 𝚿𝚙𝚎, kind of like this wizard, was to guide and help the mighty beings that were the Titans. And when the Titans kind of vanished, these 𝚃𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚎 ended up taking the mantle of guiding the Anaku people. Now, 𝚿𝚙𝚎 chose a different path, and it was he who helped aid the Lyrians, and you'll see him kind of reappear later in time, but his intentions aren't truly clear. We'll just say that. But going into it, like I said, there are no actual records as to what happened in the Trinity Forest. So just remember that. But no, when they exited the forest, we could say time began. This is how I'll say that. So mankind left, and it's not clear how long. Okay, mankind left 10 months later, and so did the Lyrians, or 10 years later. There's no record of that. So that's why this slide just says 0 to 100 AE. AE stands for, just like I think I said in the last one, after the Exodus. Now, that Exodus of man's reckoning of time is a little bit different than how the Anaku see time. So, let's get into this. These are like I don't know how to word that, like little sections. These are fragments of their exiting myth. Once outside in the harshness of the new world, we suffered long and hard under the burning 𝚃𝚘𝚎 rays. Years of toiling and living nomadically. We moved in the night and hid under tree or found cave during the day. We wandered the lands in exile, for we failed the High King 𝚆𝚘𝚎, and his punishment cast us into the harshness of the land, scorched by 𝚃𝚘𝚎. Again, these are just fragmentary translations of what would be considered the Lyrian kind of banishment myth. Now, what happened before that, records lost. This is all they really could say about that time. But from the first 100 years, it's really unknown just what exactly happened. Did they just exit the forest? Where does the forest truly end, kind of thing? That's kind of where we suffer and see a lot of mistakes when it comes to that. Let's just do this because I'm looking at myself way too much to make sure it's recording. Now, it's not really known exactly what happened in the first 100 years. So we're going to jump into the year 103 to 110, which is a major era in Lyrian culture. And that is called the Trail of Tears. Now, once the Lyrians entered what is now the Lyriia Valley, they finally exit the borders of the Anaku and were thrust into the unknown world. Though it was when the caravan of travelers entered into the lands by men called 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚎 is when the conflicts rose. And I'll have pictures to show you in the next slide here. For many long months they were attacked, and no matter how far they roamed in the Lyriia Valley, the Tannic men never ceased. So they were just trying to fucking get away. They got out of the forest, were in this harsh new world. Tribes started to settle, and in the beginning area, like just outside of the forest. We'll get into that a little bit more. And then it seems that when they nomadically were moving, they stumbled upon Tannic men. And there was already natural bad blood between them. Not really sure why the Tannic men attacked the Lyrians, but from this point, you're going to see why there is a hatred of mankind. 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 by the Lyrians. Now it was an all-out slaughter that left thousands dead, and the Anaku were defenseless out in the open. Eventually they would seek the 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, the trees of 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, and from which that point the Tannic men burned the wood to smoke them out. And this period lasted 7 years of just roaming around, hiding and being chased, and setting up establishments, and being found, and being burned out, and hiding, and chase, all that stuff. Hence the Trail of Tears. It's just this point from which Anaku culture might have been, a quarter of their population, if not half of them, could have been wiped out. Though by the year 110, they were finally free from the land of Tan, as they would call it, which they moved north into what is now called 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚎, which roughly translates to "and Shah took," to which the story of General Shah repelled the Tannic men in the battle known as Battle of 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕. It's just, that was the final battle that saw to their escaping into this new lands where the Tannic men had not chased them for many more years after that. Again, here is the area. So, 103 to 110, Trail of Tears. This is the Trinity Forest, this giant area here. Once they exited this area right here, about 100 miles ish, called, I can't read it, it's too far away. Let me see. 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍. 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 is kind of this open valley that comes from the Trinity Forest, where they probably inhabited maybe the first 100 years. It's not quite known. From that point, they would move through the Lama Apa Valley, which is this area here. And this is where they start to confront mankind. 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, this land here. Tannic men were settled up in Greeth. This is Upper Greeth, this area, Lower Greeth. And they consider this the Breagout Valley. This is the fertile crescent, if you will, of mankind. But they were coming across the Grief River and into 𝚿𝚛𝚎, and this is in the areas right around here is where you start to see the clashes between the Anaku and the Tannic men, to which through the 𝚘𝚢𝚘 Valley, they retreated to Aganu, and this area is scorched, but at one point there were these great and mighty trees that were here. This is the area to which they settled. And keep in mind, this is a 7-year process, to which after that point is when they fled into the thick forests again to finally lose them. And this is generally around this area is where the Battle of 𝚘𝚎𝚘 happened, to where 𝚘𝚎, the leader of the Anaku armies, if you want to call it that, it's almost like they would have been like peasant armies, fought off the pursuers of the Tannic men. Now, as to why the Tannic men sought to really go this far, it's not really known. You know, sadly, Quinlan was not there with them. Quinlan could not exit the forest with them. He needed to stay along with 𝚘𝚅. Now, as you can just see, it's just, you exit the forest and just a hard fucking left turn and just go straight up. Mankind claimed this area, essentially. Now, they didn't have the entirety of Tantorm as we would imagine it, but anything north of the Dragovian Mountains, which are these mountains here, all of this, these are the Dragovian Mountains, north of that to the Grief River, that was all the lands of mankind by that point, to which they were settling. This was the home of mankind. 110 to 144. Once upon the plains and the open lands, life did not get any easier for the Lyrians, but they no longer were being hunted by man. Soon they would found the area of the 𝚤𝚤𝚘𝚎, translated to High Mount, for there did their leader take them and bring them into safety. For this place did they find the great temple of Atrovian. Now, it's not quite understood just how they became mountain people as they are today, but the legend says that a group of what we call the Syrian scouts found the grand city of Atrovian. And it was this place that they would found their first settlement, and we'll get into where that's located. It's tucked away through the mazes and the badlands of the 𝚤𝚤𝚘𝚎 heights, to which they would find seclusion and safety. Now, before they kind of did that, I think it says, right before the 𝚤𝚤𝚘𝚎 heights is where they settled. Once up in that area. So it's like a mountain chain that's just in the middle is this kind of plains, to which they call the 𝚘𝚢𝚘. And that is the place where the people settled, but it was eventually the scouts that would kind of go north and found this place. Now, it was said to be many long years ago, before the War of the Gods, as the Anaku called it, it was said to be a fortress of the Titans. Whether that's true or not, it could have been a fortress of the 𝚘𝚢𝚘. It could have been something else entirely. But this place, they found it, and it had a forgotten technology that really put Lyriia steps above. They weren't these nomadic peoples no longer. Once they started to settle into these, the Atrovian, they stumbled upon this ancient knowledge, to which kind of guided them going forward. This is getting hard in my throat. Now, the city would get its reprieve. Yeah, the city would get its reprieve from rising Kramos, but its falling would charge the iridescent lights for the long dark. Now, that's kind of where the Anaku got this technology. Anything I need to talk about here? They just rediscovered ancient Anaku, essentially ancient Anaku and Titan secrets, and it brought them into the next time. So these years in 110 to 144 were definitely years where they settled into the lands, and let's kind of look at where they were. So here's the 𝚤𝚤𝚘𝚎 mountains here. They found a passageway in here. And through this, these are like badlands down here. This is just a horrible place. But as you can see, you go through here and bam, you just have this open area of these thick, beautiful, tall trees to which they settled Anaku. And you imagine all of the people of Darin were settling here, but the scouts were the ones that found through the more Badlands the path into the mountains here, to which they founded 𝚃𝚘𝚊𝚘𝚎. Now they found that place, and as you can see, these heights here, would you call it a plateau? Would you call it a fucking, I don't know what you would call it. But this area here is higher than all around it. So like it kind of goes off in this area, this way, 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎, this is the 𝚆𝚊𝚛 River. But all of this is lower, even down here in the Valleys. It kind of sits above everything there. A grand outlook. And they founded their city of 𝚃𝚘𝚊𝚘, to which they began to kind of crawl into the mountains, because there was already kind of pathways that led into the mountains of 𝚃𝚘𝚊𝚘. Here's where they started to settle it more. So it was in the first, 110 to 144, 30, almost 40 years that they were growing in this small area here. Roughly 200-ish miles, probably. 110 to 164. Now, it wasn't long before the Lyrians would travel out to the heights and found one city after another, to which with their new tools, they carved into the mountains with ease. But it wasn't until 𝚘𝚎, which was the first Darin city that they found, when cut deep enough, the mountains had massive cavities that stretched for miles. So basically, no longer were they going to have to kind of walk outside of the mountains. They found like a natural highway, if you will, a natural cavern that led from one place to another, to which they established a city there. Now, it's from within the mountains that perhaps there's that stillness that was kind of felt in Trinity Forest. Maybe that's why there was a kind of a kin thing to it. But not only that, there was actually these kind of great trees under the mountains, these strange trees. But we'll get into that. So during this time, which is the time of the Darin cities, is when buildings started to grow, architecture was being discovered, craftsmanship, the etching of stone, city being founded after another, and the size would just start to grow of Lyriia. They would start to kind of come out and into more land, underground land, whatever you want to call it. So they would carve out roadways, to which these would grow in size due to the demand of travel. Caravans and the like would see the roads' growth, becoming the great highways, or 𝚆𝚘𝚘𝚘, that led to what is called the progress of darkness. The major highways that snaked through the great caverns and connected each city together. The original builders created roads near the 𝚘𝚘𝚎 trees. This is the trees that we're talking about, which we'll get into, as they offered protection to the beasts that crept in the darkness. So in these mountains, there was definitely other creatures that lurked in the darkness. I don't know what creatures they might have been, but there were kind of dark creatures that were roaming under there. Now, these holy 𝚘𝚘𝚎 trees are seen as wards that stave off dark beings. Not only that, but many of the soldiers patrolling the ways kept caravanners and folk alike from dangers that could creep outside the light of protection. These major highways were kind of mapped along with the location of these strange 𝚘𝚘𝚎 trees. By 164, 11 sprawling, mighty cities would have been founded, and each would meet back at the center junction known as 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎, or gateways, the centermost point of the holy site the 𝚘𝚘𝚎 tree ever found. Now, one such massive 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎 gateway would be built around its trunk. Making sure never to touch it, yet close enough where one could reach out their hands if they felt like they could, but they really couldn't. Let's put it that way. It's not permitted. Now, this mighty 𝚘𝚘𝚎 tree, the biggest one they ever saw, was like hundreds of feet wide, that grew into the mountains and came out through the mountains, and they built these kind of like causeways around the tree that led to different areas. So think of a junction point that they use the Drugu tree as. Here it is in the middle. All right, boom. These are the roads that will go this way down the 𝚘𝚘𝚘, and it'll lead you to this city. Go that way, it goes to that city. It's just an underground highway, and it's a junction point. And they use these trees as such junction points. We'll kind of get into how it looks eventually once I get to that point. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the religion of that. So being that the Drugu trees were such an important thing to the Anaku people, first of all, trees in general are important to the Anaku people because it allows them to speak to Mother Gaia. It allows them to speak to the world in which they live in. That's where her voice is felt. These trees are no different than the ones that they were kind of used to, the Drager trees in the Trinity Forest. Now, these were basically holy places. The trees to an Anaku, certain types of trees are like a temple. Now, the entirety of forests are very important to Anaku people, hence why they live in forested areas for the most part. You'll see that, the Lyrians are a little bit different, but not really, because the forests, the strange forests, are under these mountains here of these Drugu trees. This is a very holy thing. So these trees, these special trees that they warrant, say they can speak to Mother, that is the temple. That is the place. So that junction point, that giant Drugu tree, that is like a massive temple. And from that point where the roads kind of come off, and you can start to see how much religion played a very important part in the early days of the Anaku and what Mother said. And there would be these special priests that were called the Dragonian 𝚘𝚘𝚊𝚘 in the early days. And they would be the ones that could interpret or confer into what Mother sought from them. And those would be the holy people, and they were said to be born under these trees. And the significance of being born under the tree is not just, oh, your mother gave birth under a fucking tree. It was more like, as the child was born, there was this sudden emission of light, and it just like, and it flash out and ignite an area around in a incandescent, like just a flash of a bulb. And this was a signaling of, this is going to be a great holy warrior. This was going to be someone who could speak to Mother. And it's a very important thing to them. Now, they would try to keep the old ways in the minds of the Anaku people with these 𝚘𝚘𝚘 people. These Dragonian 𝚘𝚘𝚘 would try to keep the understanding of, this is what it means to be Anaku. This is what it is to never forget what happened to us. Never forget that we were cast out and betrayed. Now, in time, corruption would begin in the order, and they themselves would kind of dissipate a little bit. That is a picture of a Drugu priest, 𝚃𝚘𝚎𝚕𝚞 Aburu. Now, just a standard Anaku. As you can see, they've kind of changed a little bit from the Anaku of the Atrovians. The Atrovians took on that kind of leafy, green of skin, and kind of looked to be flora people, if you will. These guys are kind of taking on more of a gray, kind of a dull undertone, and what would you say, dark elf, I guess. Is that because of the lack of sunlight? Who fucking knows? But there's just a Drugu priest right there. And this is kind of that was during the era 157 AE when they were at their height. Now, 164 to 234 AE, this chunk of time. This is when Lyriia would start to really take shape. Now, as I said, remember the major highways, and then there's these like fucking cities that they would establish, and then the Drugu trees would line it. Well, I'll show you the early days of like what that would have looked like. Now, it was during these years that the Lyrians would grow, at the aid of the Titan fortification of Atrovian, and they advanced into the age of knowledge. The art of stone cutting and shaping took them, as well as the understanding of Yuandra's depths. So they were really starting to understand mother on a deeper level. And so there was a spiritual element of growing under the mountains, growing closer to the heart of mother. And that's where they would see a difference between Atrovian Anaku, or any other Anaku for that matter, and the Lyrians. The true heart of mother is under the world. The voice of mother is outside of the world, and that's where you would see that difference kind of happening. Now, for it was a delving into the grounds that brought them back into the darkening, which was the sole concept that in these, that the dark was the true knowledge of the world. What does that mean? Well, in Anaku culture, and this is a question that I proposed myself, as human beings, we would consider the light enlightening, something that was, when you cast a light upon something, is when you begin to truly see what it is, and knowledge is birthed from that, right? The light is knowledge. It is God-given. It is this power that allows us to see things in full spectrum. Well, their understanding is the darkening, which is basically the concept of, because there is a lack of light, it allows you to search. Instead of being shown the light, instead of being like, and here it is, this is the fucking knowledge of everything, it makes you seek it out. True enlightenment doesn't exist unless it is the darkening. The fact that your eyes are closed in your inner room means you're going to search with your hands. It means you're going to use your senses. And it means you're going to find what is truly around you and within you and without you, without the eyesight, without the kind of subjective viewpoint. Do you know what I'm saying? It's just an Anaku way of belief. There is no enlightenment in the sun. That is in the shade. The idea that we can glean true knowledge from our searching for it. It's like a philosophy idea. And that's why really this kind of felt natural to the Lyrians here, to which the carving into the mountains and stuff. It felt truly natural to them. Now, in these years, they flourished and constructed great underground highways that connected the growing cities. So even more than they did before, now they're starting to stretch out, and they're going over. They found a way to go under the 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎 River and into the 𝚃𝚛𝚊𝚘 Mountains, in which I'll show you where that's at, to which this extended their whole hundreds of miles. And let's kind of look and see what that would have been like. So there's the little key in the corner there, and we'll talk about what those things mean. This 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎, these white areas, these are the major roadways. These are the major highways that they carved, each named. As you can see right here, they found a way under the 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎 River and into this. These are the 𝚃𝚛𝚊𝚘 Mountains, which are separated by the 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎. Now the triangles are the cities. So you have 𝚃𝚘𝚏𝚛𝚎, 𝚃𝚘𝚊𝚘, you have Akriveri here, 𝚃𝚘𝚏𝚏, Nippurus, Darin, Hisha, and Kesh, the first major cities. Now, 𝚆𝚤𝚤, those are those junction points, like I was saying. Drugu trees, massive drugu trees, naturally formed. Whether they were grown by the Anaku people, probably most likely they were. They were harvested and grown and used these trees that grew very quickly, but lived for a long period of time. And something that we'll see kind of going forward. And the 𝚃𝚘𝚎, these are the great area, like we'll talk about in a little bit. These are the areas, these squares, to where the outside peoples, the Daru, would have this, like these trading outposts, kind of in these giant open caverns that have these high fucking ceilings, to which the people under the mountains wouldn't truly come out, but they would, in a sense, use these 𝚃𝚘𝚎s as trading posts, these areas. But yeah, this is generally around circa 166. So you can see what you need to see here. So here's the 𝚃𝚘𝚏𝚘 Mountains and the realms here. Danau, these are the fertile areas. They would use these ports here to trade with the inside mountain folk. You can see why they were looked at as different people. Now, the 𝚿𝚛𝚎, or the people that live outside the mountains, they're not, it's hard to say, they're not like lesser. They still obey Mother through these trees, but these trees aren't the Drugu trees. So it's just, there's a little bit of a difference between them like that. God, this is rough on my voice, man. Very rough. The warriors of the Lyrian terrain cities. I think we'll take a break after this and just relax, because we've been going for like 40 minutes, I guess. The ghost armies of the Lyrians. Now, how they got this name? Well, they were established by King 𝚆𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚛𝚎 in the year 157 to counter the increasing threats that were marauders and bandits. But in time, their true enemy in 𝚃𝚛𝚊𝚛𝚒 would see the rise of forces unlike had ever been seen. And it would soon escalate into the Lyrian Wars in the years 165, to which King Navik would fall. Now, in 165 is when the new king died during these battles, and his son, 𝚃𝚛𝚊𝚛𝚎, would take the helm. Now, the wars were kind of a skirmishing going on between kind of where 𝚃𝚌 is where these skirmishes were happening. Because those were fertile lands, and because those lands were very open, I wouldn't call them open, they were forested, but they're not mountainous, they're not badlands. This is where the Toric people kind of started to push a bit. You know, by that point, 𝚃𝚏𝚎 had been kind of growing exponentially. About 165. And the issue would be the open lands were under the protection of the during this dynasty, so they were in a constant contention between Lyrians and Toric people. And eventually they would pull back to the Great Wall, which I can show you a little bit later, in around 183, to which that deterred invaders. But since they were surrounded by so much harsh lands, they got their name the Ghost Warriors because of their engineering skills with the terrain. That they could build these fortresses all across, like hidden little fortresses all around these mountains, with these tiny little pathways that could lead to each other, leading enemies being flanked quite easily. It's just something that made 𝚃𝚏𝚎 forces, it was hard for them to invade because of that. So they would be able to have these little secret tunnels and hatches that may pounce on unsuspecting invaders. We're not talking about the great highways alone, but these were just smaller ones that could be destroyed if discovered. So because of that, they never really fought truly in Lyriia. This was something that this was how Lyrians fought. Lyrians wouldn't line up in a battlefield like, all right, men, we'll trade fire. We'll have artillery from behind. And hell no. They're going to hide, and they're going to fucking slowly pick you away until there's nothing more. And they don't have a problem with that. Because it's like, guess who won, though? I don't care if it's noble or admirable or not. Okay, let us pick up right where we left off. Boom. Now, the reign of the 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕. This is going to be kind of fun, huh? So, by the year 234, I'm just going to guess off the top of my head, you can see that the land of Lyriia was already, as we would see them today. So that second picture that you saw of the realm of Lyriia, that's kind of where they were at that point. So they found ways to carve through the mountains. They had these major roadways, these major highways, 𝚃𝚏𝚎, as we said. At this point, they really were harnessed in the understanding of living within the mountains, finding these Drugu trees, establishing a culture, establishing a religion, and establishing their own, we'll just say, their own separate Anaku culture that is, I mean, okay, I'll say it like this. So, as we discussed with the Anaku peoples, and we said that they, for the most part, have the philosophy of this hive mind, this hive consciousness, determinization kind of path, where it's like you are part of this whole essence and you yourself are not a different being. You are just part of a bigger source of things. And it goes totally against what the idea of what free will is. Well, somehow you're seeing the Anaku, in the case of the Lyrians, kind of shying away from that. Now you'll see later in time, this is what becomes an issue between them and like Atrovian, for instance, which is one of the major empires of the Anaku. But we start to see that the 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, which is the ruling family, taking hold of what will become Lyriia, what is Lyriia at this point, and say that we are our own Anaku people. Now, this is about, what would that be? A couple hundred years before, the whole story of Tanais and 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍. So I don't know if exactly there would be like a bitterness towards King 𝚆𝚅𝚛𝚎, but there definitely is something. They're not Trinity Anaku. They're finding a new way of life, and through this, they're creating their own destiny of sorts at the head of 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, which the 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 is just the family name. That's all it really is. It's considered the dynasty. It's the king. And as we know, the Anaku live longer lives. So by the end of this slide, we'll kind of show, it's not slide, the end of this actual presentation, I'll show every single 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 that lived and died. But for over 200 plus years, they did reign. And they brought the Anaku from these outcasts, kind of roaming around and nomadically living, to what the Lyrians would be today. And you start to see their culture really come into its own, and the people of the stone were born. And so for hundreds of years, they fought for independence from the wood and prestige over the neighbors, as well as other Anaku, like we said. So the 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 dynasty and these Anaku people, the Lyrians, were now becoming, they're not like we're Anaku and this is another Anaku culture here. It's like we're different. They're starting to kind of create their own path, and and because of that, they're growing in strength. And this is definitely something that's really helped them in the years to follow after this. So because the states are growing, the realms from without and the ones from within, we'll start to see divisions kind of happen that might have to be honed in. But at the end here, I did kind of talk about who rules it now and this and that, but we'll get into that a lot more later. The 𝚃𝚢𝚐 guilds. Now these guilds are, once these settlements and these cave cities, whatever you want to call them, once they were founded and the great highways were made and everything was working on a dime, like that picture we showed, once that was like, let me look at something. I got 57 minutes, okay. Once that was working, 200 plus years of all this happening, they started to really, mining and minerals and finding resources within the stone that help aid them, whether that be for structures, because you just build into it to create the cities, but whether that be structures like the tools that they need, the weapons that they might need, even the armor. Metallurgy was something that the Anaku, of the Lyrian Anaku, just picked up naturally. And so it's because of this that they began really moving resources back and forth through these ways. And that was the whole purpose of these roads to be constructed, is like we start to see them flourishing within their culture. And it's an internal flourishing. And not only that, but the outside fertile realms were creating resources that would feed the peoples. And so when the 𝚃𝚢𝚐𝚐 guilds were established, this is how they were to mitigate realms of people's control, if you will. Now, these guilds were able to pass from within and without the mountains. So, as I said before, the people on the outside of the mountains, which I think the coming slide will talk about, the 𝚿𝚛𝚎, they were not allowed inside. If you were born outside the mountains, you stayed outside the mountains. Or if you could have been, I don't know, cast out, or there's a debt to be paid and you have to go out. There are certain stipulations for why Anaku will end up leaving the mountains, whether that be exile, whether that be like slavery, whether that be, I don't know, like I think I saw there somewhere where it said that they have like a debt to pay and you are allowed back in once you pay the debt in full. These people were allowed to go in and out. These were traders. These were guilds that worked with the trading companies that were able to establish a sense of culture and, I don't know, politics and trade networks and all that stuff. And in this country did it flourish. And it's seen as under the 𝚿𝚛𝚎, it's like we have to work together to create the best people we can be for ourselves. And there are certain statesmen, there are certain people in the higher class outside of the Council of Elders that should be the ruling class over, because they have the best interest for the Anaku people in general. And so eventually we're going to see a issue when it comes to the religious side and this whole merchant side. So there's a kind of divide here. But we're starting to see the rise of the merchant class in Lyrian cultures. Now, as I said, they're somewhat banished, in fact, from their homes after being out of Kramos raised for too long, according to their customs. But there were special amendments for the exchange of goods to the 𝚿𝚛𝚎. Well, what is the 𝚿𝚛𝚎? The 𝚿𝚛𝚎, as I said before, is these trading pavilions outside of those areas that I showed on the map. They'd be near cities at times, or they would be kind of these open ways where the highway led out into the fertile realms. And this is where vendors and goods would be traded and blah, blah, blah. The good places to which these were like the marketplaces. Now, the guild members would sacrifice a life of ease into the mountains to venture out, brave the harsh world that would become the world of the Aeon, as some would call it. Not a profession of the faint of heart, but the reward is much greater and longer than their journeys take them. Most of the time, news from the outside world is passed between guild members and filtered back to the cities. So not only are they getting goods and trading with each other, but this is also how they procure news from faraway lands. This will be later in time, but as of right now, we have only internal tradings. So let's look at the 4 main trader guilds. We have the Dagmar Association, Group Sabilu, the Maka Trust, and Makiris Trade. Those are the main 4 guild members. Now, underneath the guild trade, so this is the Traders Guild, would be the Mining Guild. So these are the people that the traders would get their products from and then sell. And these miner guilds were established around the same time. They kept the ores in the Lyrian economy relevant. Mining of ores kept their economy relevant during the boom of trade that stretched across Voss in time. Long before the Industrial Revolution, Lyriia had put their nation on the map, so to speak, due to the high output of minerals ores from the Sinker Mountains. It didn't take long for the Anaku to break their pact and embrace the Aeomen influence. So this is stuff we'll get into a lot later. We're going to really start talking about when they almost put themselves on the world stage. Right now, think of it like in the 230s and 300s. It's only within Lyriia. There's just growth in Lyriia. These are not seafaring people, so they're not necessarily trading with the Atrovians across the water, nor the Atrovians back with them. This is just purely internal. And time we'll start to see what's being talked about right here happening. Trade was good, and with that trade, the economy grew, and Lyrian peoples prospered in the mountains and became one of the wealthiest Anaku nations. Look at the miners' guilds right here. So you have the Eru's Honor, Alinu's Bow, Kalab Regiment, the Toric Guild, 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, the 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 brothers. And these factions would bicker over control of ore deposits that were scattered all over 𝚃𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 mountains. Now, like where the 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚕𝚞𝚍 heights and stuff are, the 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚕𝚞𝚍 mountains, that's technically considered 𝚃𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 mountains. You know, the entirety of the mountain from, you know, where the Illyrian Strait all the way over. That's essentially why they call it the 𝚃𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 mountains, but there are divisions. But these merchants, well, these guys here, in fact, the miners' guilds, there was a lot of division with who had what realm, and where one could mine and where one could not mine, and the jobs that, well, he stole workers from this guild because of blah blah blah. It's kind of, I wouldn't say cutthroat, but we're talking, it's very, they're merchant folk, you know, like you see in our real world, like it's there's certain people that are better at that than others, I'll say that. Now, they were running under the customs of merchant law, and that would be what maintains and controls the guilds under the king. So you have the 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 king and his retinue and his, you know, his oh fuck, what are those guys called? Like vassals. Within that and under them, and when it comes to rule, would be the Traders Guild and then the Miners Guild. And that is the main source of the engine that keeps the world going. Let's kind of go back and talk a little bit about the outside cultures. All right, so I have that top part I was supposed to take out. The next slide, I'll show you again where these cultures are. So the reason I said this part, the fertile people, because I didn't really explain enough like what the fertile people were. I feel like I touched on them a bit, but like I said, there were certain people that were looked at differently. So the quote, it was said that they revered the outside, but their faith was placed within the rock. It's a quote about Lyrian people. Those that live outside the 𝚃𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 mountains mostly consist of laborers and those who have been banished from the Darine cities for one reason or another, as I said before. Laborers themselves are either indentured servants or paying off debts. You go out there because you are meant to atone for something. And sometimes the atoning could even just be like a debt. And that's kind of a stupid thing to think about, but we're talking about Illyrians. This is just kind of how that ended up working for them. The issue with laborers is the longer they stay outside, the less likely they will ever be allowed in again. But there are those like soldiers and the merchants who have a bit of a, they don't get kind of the repercussions of like that. They're allowed in and out because they're doing what's best for the Darine dynasty. Now, it was the debt payers and indentured servants who were seen as untouchables, ones that broke their bond long ago with Gaia. The true Gaia, like I said before. These people lived in what would be called fertile lands, and they themselves were seen not as Darine citizens, but lesser peasants, at least before the Civil War. Now, it was in the early years, so from, you know, around the 160 or whatever it was, and into the 300s and going on, they were just considered fertile states, and they had their own king, the fertile May 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎 the first, to which his sons would take the name evermore. It's just, you are 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎 the second, 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎 the third, and all that. These people were the labor class. And in some ways, it was a bit unfair to say that, like, well, because you're outside and because you don't have money, I've been out here long enough, I'm cursed. What did I do wrong? I keep the machine going. You can kind of see that there might be a divide. And so that's when this 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎 the first just kind of rose up. And he united these people. This would be a direct conflict between 𝚆𝚆𝚛𝚎 and the Darine dynasty, the Darine king at that time. That would be the point of contention, to which in time you're going to start to see there needs to be unification of the full Anaku people. It's something within culture that we seem to do a lot, and And like I said, with the Anaku people being of a determinational background, it's something all the more. So though they themselves are kind of venturing into the idea of what free will could be, there's still this kind of honing in on, like, we need to kind of make sure that everything is exactly what the free will is of the highest kind. It's the free will of the 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞, not the free will of the people. These are the original fertile realms. Though the largest swath there... Do I still have my... I gotta get it out again, huh? Though the biggest swath is called the fertile realms, these are all fertile realms. Now, as you can see, big portions of the land are fertile realms. There's that fucking wall that I was telling you about. But these are the places that would be united, and they would have their own rule for quite a while. And it was kind of seen as, for a little bit, tolerated. Like, okay, they do need leaders out there for my will, but it is this King 𝚿𝚛𝚎 that will fall in line to what I say as the 𝚿𝚛𝚎 king. But I wanted to kind of point out the realms here that you can see that these are the fertile peoples. These are the 𝚿𝚛𝚎. 235 to 514 AE. This would be considered the age of growth. And this age, there was a lot of growth. Now, where does it say? I think my notes here are incorrect, so I don't read them. In this time, the lands of the 𝚿𝚛𝚎 stretch beyond the Tigris River into the Lavero Mountains. This is beyond the map that I've ever showed you. I'll show you in the next map how far they would have stretched. And it would hold from the 𝚘𝚎𝚘𝚎 all the way north to the Lavero Mountains, to which they sent out peoples into the fertile lands of Daradin and Rich to rule by 𝚙𝚎 I. So you have the two kings, you could call it technically, ruling this area. And so at this point, there was a... What does that say? Again, I'm not good with numbers, man. 336,000? Is that how you say that? Or 336/000 square miles. And this is in and out. So within the mountains and the fertile realms. This is quite a large swath of land. And in between, from the year 235 to 514, it just kept growing. They just kept harnessing. They kept creating. They kept bringing their culture up and into this higher echelon of society. But still, not a lot of trade, not a lot of talk with the outside world. But some things did happen during this swath of time here. But let me just kind of show you what I was talking about, how far they would have had. So here's the modern map. Essentially, from down here to 𝚘𝚎𝚘𝚎, from that point, so this, we'll say this is a line here, all the way to the Lavero and Anaku. They didn't really have the Ekusian Mountains yet at Halaf. These are the two areas that are newer. But you can see 3/4 of Lyriia was already there, and mountain cities are being established, and major highways were being established, and farmlands were being created, and the forests were being harnessed, and the culture had been growing and growing and growing. But there was a problem that was kind of happening around this time, and that would be the fade. So much like the Atrovian tribes, the Lyrian high nobles started to see some people fading from the world. And this was something that could have started to spread in fear. But they chose not to address the situation as not to cause a panic. And it was Ayakovo Darin who sought the answers to the fade. Yet when the Abbey could not find the answers, did the search amongst the other Nakus start. That was when he decided to call on the knowledge of the Fachu tribes in the 𝚘𝚘𝚘𝚎 Mountains, these old allies that they know exist. Because you got to keep in mind, I'm sure there were Lyrians that were kind of venturing out into unknown lands. They were going to the 𝚘𝚘𝚘𝚎 Mountains, and they knew that the Fachu would always be around. And if there was a group of Anaku, like a tribe, that had the highest intelligence, that had these shamans, these priests that were so sophisticated in how they heard the voice of Mother, surely it would be they who would understand this. So let's kind of talk about the 𝚆𝚛𝚎's influence on Lyrians a little bit. Man, I can't wait to start feeling better. The 𝚆𝚛𝚎 are a group of spiritual priests to all high-class Anaku society on 𝚆𝚆. They're quasi-neutral party, but also the spiritual head of all Anaku. This would kind of happen in time. And there is a link that they believe to the Serpentine Order, but that's something that's way off in the distance. As it is believed, this radical group carry on 𝚆𝚛𝚎's commands. Okay. Now, the 𝚆𝚛𝚎 aren't really the best guys. Let's be honest. Like, there's blood sacrifices, there's connections between radical groups, but all of what they do, what they would become, would be solving the issue of the cure. This is just something that they would focus on. In the early days, you bet your ass they were trying whatever they could to stop this issue. This was something that they did. So, I don't even know how to explain it. It's almost like they would, what's that fucking word, where they bring people in and make them become part of them. I don't remember, but the 𝚆𝚛𝚎 are an old order of Anaku that at this time, so around between the 200s and the 500s, that era, it was known that if anyone had answers, it would be them. But it kind of disappeared. The reason I'm bringing this slide up is because I want to show like what the 𝚆𝚛𝚎 will become. And so you could see how Lyria's connection to some of the things that are going to be discovered during the 1640s will be placed in the lap of Lyrians. Because it is the Lyrians themselves who harbor some of the things that the 𝚆𝚛𝚎 were up to. And like I said, when it comes to the Serpentine Order, that is something that the Lyrians are going to take the blame for. This is a little preemptive to kind of let you know, like, that whole seeking the truth from the 𝚆𝚛𝚎 thing that the king did, that might have been a bit of a mistake. Because it doesn't really fall in line with what the Lyrians want to be. That makes more sense for the Atrovians. The Lyrians and the Atrovians, holy shit, man, that's like hand-in-hand kind of stuff. The Jinjin tribes originally. This event now we're going to talk about is one of the most meaningful and most strangest events, actually. The discovery of King 𝚆𝚆's demise in 426. So in the story of mankind, when the brothers 𝚃𝚌 and 𝚿𝚛𝚎, when the beginning of Adrana and Tantorum, there was the story that 𝚿𝚛𝚎 entered the forest as he wasn't supposed to do. And it was Dove who spoke to 𝚃𝚌 to say, you must punish your brother and burn the forest and destroy all that are within it. That happened. This biblical event that just happened. When the discovery happened amongst the 𝚆𝚛𝚎, it was the most monumentous thing in all Lyrian culture. Now, there would have been a natural bitterness towards Tan for the years, but when they found out, that it was 𝚃𝚌 of Tantorum, some sort of Tantoric fucking king, burned and killed all the Anaku, that was one of the moments where they realized, like, that's the Tannic men, and they're still at it. And this is one of our natural enemies. They did establish the idea that Tantorum now becoming a kingdom, a condom, whatever you, that's not a word. It's it kind of is, but it's not like con realm. I don't know. Condom. They should roll with that. Because they're called Ducans. A Ducandom? I don't fucking know. Anyway, they were establishing themselves as a country, and he's like, this is a fucking threat. These people. There was probably, like, at the same time, well, fucking King 𝚆𝚆, like, though he banish us, fuck him, because we are here because of him. But at the same time, it's like, but you have these Toric fucking men killing Anaku. And there were other good clans in that forest, and now they're gone. This is an issue. This is something that goes forward as this is our fucking enemy. To the Romans, these are the Germanic people. These are the Celts. Do you know what I mean? To the Greeks, these are the Persians. Like, this is our enemy. But there was a moment where 𝚃𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 had changed, because he heard the story and the tales of a Tannic man saving some of the lost tribes and taking them to a holy land, to which eventually it would become Adrana. That was 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 and his escape, and then the story of Adrana starts to happen from that point. But it was something that I would say it kind of surprised 𝚃𝚚𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍. Okay, so they're not all the same. And when he looked into the story that was being told about this Tannic man, this 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍, the Adine, there might be something different. And this person seemed to secede away from the tyranny that Tantorum apparently wants to become, where they are ruled by a false god and they are destroying the races of the Anaku for whatever reason. Here we have a Tannic man that's doing something different for the first time. It's not a monumentous moment in the history of the Lyrian people, but that king at that time, it was something that changed the way the Anaku would start to behave, at least the Lyrian Anaku, in the grand stage of everything. Now, in the coming years, though their hostility towards Tantorum never diminished, their open-mindedness towards all other races would have been shared united. The hearing of 𝚆𝚅𝚛𝚎𝚕𝚞𝚍 demise was the single greatest moment in Lyrian history, and one helped shape them for years to come. It's like there's some good and there's some bad to it. Now, the next era of time, about 500 years almost, this is a moment to which, I don't even know how to explain it, like Lyriia just jumps on the world stage. Year 650, Atrovian falls to the Pharaohs. They go quiet. Around that time, there was probably, they figured out how to ride boats and shit. They figured that stuff out. They were talking to Atrovian. They were doing trading back and forth, and they just disappear. And no other Anaku, according to the Lyrians, they had no idea if they were the last Anaku on the entire planet. You have to keep that in mind. So the way Lyriia sits in the world, there's so much different than Atrovian. There's so much different to the any other like lesser Anaku races within their own forests around the world. These Lyrians seem to embrace the Aeonic cultures because there was a point where they thought, like, it's just us. And we could either just fade or become part of this whole thing going on. Become part of the world. Now, there were no other signs of them. So they thought, like, well, these are the end days. Atrovian is gone. Places like, by the year 1000, holy shit, Adrana and Tantorum are at war. There's conflicts going back and forth. They see that's going on. And then there was some kind of moment that happened, and it was the fruitful people of the sands. Those are the people of Dubois that made their acquaintance for the first time. And they realized that there were lands beyond the Irian and the Illyrian. They're like, there's more lands out there? And they started to trade with the people of Dubois. And the people of Dubois had these resources, and they're like, oh, fuck, like, you guys have all these minerals. We have these things, and then we could trade. And it just kind of was so fruitful for the understanding that was already happening, that the Lyrians were already this merchant type people, and all of a sudden, bam. And it was okay. Like, the interesting thing is, like, these are people of Dubois. These are the people of sands. Their Aeon is Volur. They're not mankind. And I guess it's hard to really explain, like, they ran into a whole new race of people that they didn't even know existed. They thought it was just them and Tantorum and the Anaku from the Trinity Forest, which includes like the Atrovians and stuff. That's what all they thought. Now you're saying that there's a land across the fucking Illyrian and there's people there? And the Dubois is like, there's many people everywhere. But it was through that the Aeons and the Lyrian Anaku established this trade, established this friendliness. We're not alone in the world. It's not just the Anaku versus Tantorum. There's another group of people that don't even really like the Tantorum themselves. They're not enemies of them, but in these years, this has got to be huge growth. And it's a whole different thing, I guess. I'm just trying to paint that these aren't the people of 𝚿𝚛𝚎𝚎. These are whole new groups of people. And the time was called the Long Quiet, but it should have been called the Age of Enlightenment. For they helped bring wealth and resources to the Lyrians and far outweighed the weight in gold. And eventually they would be taught seafaring, like even more than they ever did. And then in that time, they started to find other races. And then there was so many more. There was like the Hafi people of the mountains, which they knew kind of existed. They didn't realize the major difference. And I'm going to kind of, in the next slide, I'm going to really start showing you where the trades and stuff happened. But from that point, then there's the 𝚘𝚘𝚊𝚘, and then there's like, wow, this is insane. And then Adrana, they mastered the ship travel as well, and the 𝚘𝚘𝚊𝚘, and there's a whole world out there, and it just opens everything up. And the last 500 years was this buildup and this harnessing of what Lyria becomes. And then all of a sudden you have this huge swath of time, which I know it's like 600 years, but I want to show that trade was happening, and growth in trade, and growth in trade. And it's just this whole thing. And it was during that time that Lyria needed to unite itself, and that's what they did. And that's when finally in 104 to 109 you have the War of Light and Dark, and Hapsu VIII against is that how you say that? Melanios? Yeah, Melanios Darine. And that was the uniting that happened inside of this era. But from that point, from the year 109, I mean, you have Lyria as a whole going into the modern world and setting itself on the world stage. And it was from 1004 into the next 300 years that they grew their trade, was spread far and wide, with the 𝚘𝚊𝚘, 𝚘𝚘𝚘, Adrana, realms of Dubois, and soon the Atrovians. So the Atrovians magically come back in the picture, which is very strange. And it would be the Atrovians that would see their friendliness with the Aeon races as kind of, that's a bad thing. Like, these, you shouldn't be fucking around with these Aeons. And remember how I said that the Atrovians would send out their kind of inquisition, if you will, their emissaries of the Anaku. This is what I'm saying. Like, they'd say, like, you need to stick with the Anaku way. You need to become an Anaku, a true Anaku. Right now, you're like these merchant Aeomen, and you're trading with everyone, and this is an issue. And, I mean, it kind of caused tension between the Darine dynasty and the Atrovians, right? But it would be the Abbey who would be the ones that make all of this so. And this is when things start to get interesting. So, again, we're talking short history. We're not, I mean, yeah, that's 600 years. You can't just say like, oh yeah, nothing really happened. A lot of things happen, but we need to get into the picture. So let me kind of go to the next slide. I'll just kind of run over some of the trades and how everything happened and worked. So we'll get a, I don't know, a pen, right? Okay. So originally you have the people of Dubois, there we go, finding the Lyrians here. And then all of a sudden from Dubois, they were getting trade with the 𝚘𝚘𝚘 already. Dubois was already trading with Tantorum. They don't have to necessarily trade with Tantorum. They can work with Dubois here. And through Dubois opened up everything. And then eventually in time, the 𝚘𝚘𝚘 and the 𝚘𝚊 would trade with them. And from the 𝚘𝚊 would be the Adranians. And then from the 𝚘𝚊, the 𝚘𝚘𝚘, and the 𝚘𝚘𝚘 would be coming from like 𝚘𝚘𝚘𝚘 and the 𝚘𝚊, 𝚘𝚘𝚘𝚘 and Tantorum, Tantorum and the 𝚘𝚊. this era, and from like the 1000s going forward, it's so messy, but it's true. Everything started to just grow. And you have all of these people, minus Sapernia, because, you know, they're not really, they're not merchant people. They're like what they would describe Scythians as in the old days and stuff. The despising of the merchant class people, this Jewish kind of thing, that is Sapernia. Everyone else, Drana, 𝚆𝚊, Tentorum, Willandia, Dubois, Valakmir, I mean the South as the entire nations, we're talking mass trade to where we're seeing the reliance on each other. That would be the issue that the Atrovians would have to Lyrians. Like, you try to become these merchant people, and now you need them. To which the Lyrians would say, like, no, it's you have to become part of this world. This world may have been for us originally, but we need to be a part of it just like they do too. And it was the Atrovians who said, okay, is that how you want to do it? Let's talk about the 𝚊𝚤. 1232. The 𝚊𝚤 were Drugu priests that rose from the ashes of their brethren, the Drugu priests. Now, sorry, the Drugu cultists. Remember those people I talked about in the beginning where it's like, the 𝚊𝚤? Those guys kind of just dissipated slowly. As religion became less and less, these Drugu priests, these 𝚊𝚤 as they call themselves, named after the founder, they were trying to preserve the original Anaku way. We're not going to be these merchant people. We are going to follow what we're supposed to do. We are Anaku people. Now, they would say the modern Anaku are following Aeonic affairs. And they thought this was destroying the culture of them. But in 1234, when Vasilion Darine died suddenly, taken by the Fade, it was his son 𝚃𝚎𝚎 who took the crown. And this is the moment that it happened. That is when they call themselves the 𝚊𝚤, but they are under the guise of this failing 𝚊𝚤. It's like the priests. They're like, oh yeah, they're there. They've been around for like 1,000 years, but we just let them hang out. They're like, oh yeah, we're totally that. But in reality, there's a cult growing within that. A division happening within the 𝚊𝚤. And it was the 𝚊𝚤 who secretly pledged their loyalty to Emperor 𝚃𝚔𝚎𝚎, for they heard the call alongside the Atrovians, worshipping the hidden titan of old. And they were going to help the Atrovians unite all Anaku into the hatred of mankind. So the 𝚊𝚤 ended up working and finding a way where these emissaries from Atrovia came over. The 𝚊𝚤 were a part of it, and they said, we will work with this too, to which the 𝚆𝚤 got involved. So you have the 𝚆𝚤, the 𝚊𝚤 inside the Lyrian kingdom. So these aren't just like all Lyrians. These are just the certain cultists and the Atrovians all uniting to create a united Anaku. What stands in the way? The Darine dynasty. The people that are putting up with the idea that Anaku should behave like Aeomen. This is an issue. So it would be the 𝚊𝚤 who would start to grow in, what's the word I'm looking for? Popularity amongst some people that may have felt this way in the in Lyriia. And they would start painting the Scourge of Trinity a little bit differently. This is why it's a little lost, like what really happened in the forest. Or like, King Prelbug's death, they used it differently. And they started to worship that fucking book, Biblios, or Cremos Biblios, or whatever it was. This is the division that started happening. So we're going to skip this next slide because I never got information about it. But it was supposed to be about the Valen campaign and what happened, because that happened in 1310 to 1313. It's a good prelude to the trade war in a sense, but so we'll skip it and I'll talk about it. As I talk about the trade war, this will be the first, trade war, the Valen campaign. This was definitely a testing of mettle between the Lyrians and the, what are those fuckers called? The Tantorum. So while this 𝚘𝚘 thing is growing, while this division is being created, while they're slowly whispering in the ear of the 𝚿𝚛𝚎 as much as they can, you have conflict starting where the Lyrians are really starting to fight back at the Tantorum. And they realize, like, it's not as bad as it could be. And they did it in the lands of the Valons. So I don't know a whole lot about that. I would love to have gotten into it, but it was never really talked about. Now, the largest empire of, so this is 1621 to present. The largest empire of Anaku are Atrovians, and it is their influence that sees all right of all Anaku on Vas are honored. So Atrovians have become top dog within the last, this is 1621 to present, so whatever, 40 years, 20 years, I don't know. This is where the emissaries preached of the halls of Aeon palaces. The Atrovians would stand behind any Anaku no matter what force they hailed from. Their mission is to create a world that is for the Anaku people and to stop the fate of their people. Now this ambition fit right into the goal of the 𝚆𝚤𝚛𝚎 Serpentine order. They all work together. The Lyrians were the only ones that weren't necessarily with them, though the 𝚘𝚘 were. Now, Javanos Doreen felt the pressure of a 𝚆𝚊𝚛𝚎 Kalyana in his growing empire. Even his own people were divided about the empire and their call to the Anaku band. Like, to band all the Anaku together, there were people within Lyria that were like, we have to. All Anaku together. And so there was a divide. And you see this dilemma between determination and free will. It's this dilemma that's growing here. And then there was this kind of pressure that this was basically what kind of set everything in motion. Year 1621, the Brotherhood Pact. On paper, the 𝚿𝚛𝚎 said, okay, we're not going to absolve into this empire, but we will unite with you in your cause. I'm sure it wasn't something that Javanos was like, yeah, he's right, let's do it. This was something to stave off anarchy in his population. This was something that was an issue. Now, the 𝚘𝚘 were growing in power. These priests. It was just a matter of time. So, in 1625, the sinking of the RMS 𝚆𝚐𝚐 was believed to be by the hands of the Lyrians. And this conflict would begin the trade wars. Now, trade would halt in the Mesosar Channel, and the flourishing nation of Adrana would grind to a halt. And trade agreements were just kind of going crazy everywhere. People were picking sides. It was one of those moments for the Lyrians in 1625 when the RMS 𝚆𝚐𝚐's sinking was blamed on them by Tantorum. It couldn't come at a worse time. They're staving off insurrection from within because of the 𝚘𝚘, what's the word I'm looking for? The presence and the bullying that Atrovian is doing to trying to absolve them into this Anaku empire. And then the signing of the Brotherhood Pact. Now all of a sudden we're being blamed for a conflict. Now that's just going to make everything just fall apart. And so you see everything that Lyria was building up to is now crumbling under their feet. No longer are they going to be their own Anaku people. But I think at this moment is when Javanos was like, it might all be over. We might be Atrovians. It might not be a good thing. And that's kind of where they stand. But it was one person who came back when they needed him most, you would say. That'd be Quinlan. He reunited with Javanos in the year 1589. In that time, Quinlan would garner influence in high-class society. Yet his intent was to influence the Tyrrhene king. It was Quinlan that would aid the king in his navigation of the political field. The 𝚘𝚘 were taking more and more control, which meant the 𝚆𝚤𝚛𝚎 soon would follow. And the Atrovian influence was already taking his court. And upheaval was growing. And Quinlan came back and said, we can figure this out together. And that's where Quinlan, the person that was supposed to help the Anaku, was ending up staving off true Anakuism to the Lyrians. Now, it says right here, now that this was morally against what their allies in North Atrovian would agree to. So in the waning months of the trade war, Lyrian kings signed a pact with the 𝚆𝚊 to continue trade in hopes of garner relations between their people. So when the trade war was starting to happen, it says waning months, but we're going to go ahead a little bit, I guess. This would piss Atrovia off. And they said, like, that was their final move. And then, sorry, I should have said waning. I think I meant, like, isn't that when that means before? I think waning means coming down. I should have meant the preceding months is what I meant. The idea of that was because Atrovia was committing acts against the Valens and Aeonic people in their involvement under the guise that they weren't true Atrovians. I mean, this is such a complicated thing. It's like you have the Atrovians false flagging operations to unite the Anaku people. And in that, the Lyrians were like, we have to do something. Because for some reason, Dubois allied themselves with Atrovia, and we're technically allied with Atrovia, so Dubois is with us. That's when you see the Lyrians and the 𝚆𝚊. He's like, we need a natural ally and people that understand us the most, and that would be the Hafi people. Though they're Aeonic people, they are also mountain people as well. And these are the only ones that are kind of a neutral party. And there's probably a lot of reasons to it in the mind of Quinlan working with Javanos to say, we have to do something. And we'll kind of get into that eventually, because you got to remember, the 𝚆𝚤 are in the mountains. The 𝚆𝚊 are near the 𝚆𝚤. Could something happen to if worst comes to worst, and we ally with the 𝚆𝚊, who can ally themselves with the Drana, can they see an issue or something? Could they do something like destroy the 𝚆𝚤? Could that momentarily happen where Lyriia and Dubois can unite against Atrovia? But that happened at such a bad time because the RMS Valky sinking threw everything out of whack, and now sides had to be chosen, and that whole uniting with the Hafi people, it was almost a moot point. And Quinlan and Javanos, and later his son, would have to be picking up the pieces and try to find a way to keep Lyriia united. And that's going to be the issue going forward. How to stave off the threats of Atrovia to the north and Tantorum to the south. This is the king's list I was talking about. So Xanathos would have been the one that kind of took over after his father died in 1629. So right after the trade wars ended, but Xanathos was the one who he's the one that the Ebi are going to unite against. So here's the king's list. He's the one that the Ebi kind of are against. But I just wanted to show the picture of the kings of Lyriia. And the next one is, these are the ending slides. These are the counts and elders. So this is just how within each realm you have a count. And then within that they have the elders, like the circle of elders that rule. And so there's the realms. And then you have the counts. And just kind of how they got it, really. This is kind of in the year 1647. I felt like I'm not going to sit and paint the entire fucking history of where this is and when it happened, and like, okay, what was the 1,000-year history of this one throne of the Reshe realm or some shit. I'm like, dude, there's no way. this doesn't really have any, I mean, eventually I'll get into it. I'll probably show this again and say like, okay, so now that these are the guys, let's talk about it a little bit, you know. And that's the end of it. I'm glad, because my throat, man, I hope I painted a good enough picture about the internal struggles that are happening between Lyriia and Atrovian Tantorum. And I really tried to just touch on a little bit the relationships with the Hafi people that would kind of come to fruition during and after the trade war. But as you can see, Lyriia united themselves with the 𝚆𝚊 people like right before the trade war kicked off, and then it was the trade war. So we'll talk about what that entailed, and we'll get more into what Quinlan was thinking in all of that. So another one done. Holy shit. On to the next one. I have no clue what it'll be. Hopefully, maybe the Hoffa people. I'd like to do Tantorum, but I don't think I don't think Kevin's ready. Because I'm going to need a detailed hit. I mean, like what I showed you there, it took me about 8 hours to like get that all together of straight work. Maybe more. I don't know how much he has about his history. So we might have to jump to the Hafi people, which would be really fun because those are new people that we don't know a whole lot about. So, and that's this one. So good night, you fucking piece of shit. Okay, you don't have to get mad. I'm not mad. I'm like, you know, I'm just done. Okay.